In 1937, a small lighthouse off the rocky coast of Cornwall, England, stood as it always had, weathered, wind-beaten, but steadfast. It was known locally as Penwith Light, perched on the edge of a crag called Black Hollow Bluff. The waves that crashed below it were fierce in winter, and the winds carried the smell of salt and stories. The lighthouse was manned by a keeper named Hugh Ramsay, a quiet man in his mid-50s. He had been posted at Penwith for nearly 18 years, content with solitude and routine. Every day, he logged weather conditions, inspected the glass, cleaned the lamp, and filed his ledger entries without fail. Each entry was careful, dated, precise, until 1 week when they weren't. The logbook, still preserved in a maritime archive in Penzance, shows an abrupt gap from April 9th to April 16th, 1937. No weather entries, no maintenance notes, no ink at all. Then, on April 17th, Hugh resumed writing as if nothing had happened. April 17th, 1937. Cloud cover thick at dawn. Lamp functioning properly? No vessel spotted. Saw gulls circling west side of bluff. No other activity. It was the kind of entry that made the gap even stranger. Calm. Normal. Not a hint that anything had gone amiss. But back on the mainland, quiet questions had begun to stir. On April 12th, during the missing week, a fishing boat radioed the harbor with a curious report. The vessel had passed within view of Penwith Light late that night and seen the lamp flickering. Not failing, flickering. Not long after, a second ship reported the lighthouse was completely dark. A maintenance crew sent out 3 days later found everything in working order. The lamp was lit. Hugh, when questioned, claimed there had been no outages. All systems in order, he wrote in the supplemental report. But his eyes, according to the assistant engineer, looked deeply tired. There were other, stranger details too. A cook from the nearby village of Kew Downs claimed that Hugh had come ashore briefly on April 14th, a rare thing for the lighthouse keeper, who usually only made supply runs every 2 weeks. She said he purchased a loaf of bread, 2 tins of sardines, and a pencil. He said little, paid an exact change, and left. The next day, another villager saw someone walking along the cliff's edge near the lighthouse, well past dusk. They assumed it was Hugh, but when asked later, he denied ever leaving the light that evening. It wasn't a scandal, not quite, but the rumors remained. Why had Hugh left the lighthouse midweek? Why hadn't he recorded anything in the ledger for 7 full days, something he had never failed to do, even during storms? Years later, after Hugh retired, the lighthouse was converted to an automated beacon. The ledgers and reports were boxed up and archived. All but one. In 1971, during a renovation of the keeper's quarters, a narrow leather-bound notebook was found sealed behind the wall panel. It bore no official markings, just a faint inscription inside the front cover. For those who watch the sea and know what they've seen. The writing inside was Hugh's, and it was dated precisely during the missing week. You stay with the story, curious now, not just about what Hugh Ramsay saw, but why he chose to hide it. The notebook found behind the wall panel wasn't written like his usual ledgers. It was less formal, more personal. Each entry began with a date, but instead of crisp weather reports or routine maintenance notes, the pages read like quiet confessions, written for no one, or perhaps for someone Hugh had hoped would someday understand. April 9th, 1937. Heavy fog rolled in by morning, sea calm. The light burned steady through the night, but I heard something just past the cliffs. Not waves, not gulls, something lower, like breathing, I stepped outside but saw nothing. April 10th. Woke with a strange feeling. The gulls haven't circled today. The sea feels too still. There was a knock at the door last night. No boat in sight. I didn't answer. From the first few pages, it was clear Hugh had experienced something unusual, something that shook his dependable routine. April 11th. Saw movement below the bluff at twilight. A figure near the rocks. Not a fisherman, too still. I watched for nearly 20 minutes and it didn't move. When I returned with the binoculars, it was gone. He began to record strange details. The sound of footsteps on the spiral stairs when he was alone. The brief extinguishing of the lamp. Just for seconds, he said, as if someone had passed in front of the lens. Then came April 13th. Woke to find the logbook entries gone. Every page for the past week torn out. I don't remember doing it. Ink stains on my fingers, but I haven't written since the 9th. Found a piece of paper tucked under the lamp housing. My own handwriting. It says, "Stop recording. They notice patterns." I don't know what that means. The entries became increasingly abstract. Still calm, still methodical, but marked with a kind of hushed urgency. He noted changes in the tides that didn't match the almanac, a low hum heard at night near the lighthouse base, and the presence of distant lights offshore moving without a sound. April 15th. The flicker happened again tonight, but I wasn't inside. The lamp faltered when I stood at the edge of the bluff. I heard the knock again. Louder, 3 times. The kind of knock that waits to be answered. And then the final entry. April 16th, 1937. Whatever this is, it doesn't want to be seen, only to known. Not documented, not studied, just felt. That's why I stopped writing in the official log. But I had to leave this somewhere, in case it chooses another keeper, or someone returns. I will resume the official notes tomorrow. Pretend it was nothing. He signed it. Hugh R. The notebook was never made public. The man who discovered it in 1971, an electrician named Colin Marsh, turned it over to the Maritime Archive, where it was stored but never cataloged. When Colin was asked why he handed it over instead of keeping it, he simply said, "Didn't feel right holding on to something like that. I don't think he meant for just anyone to read it." In the decades since, Penwith Light has stood quietly, its beams sweeping the waves, no longer manned, no longer watched from within. But some locals say that if you walk the cliffs on a foggy April night and stand very still, you might hear footsteps inside the empty tower, or a knock from somewhere just beyond the light. And if you do, you might find yourself wondering, as Hugh did, what happens when you see something the sea would rather you forget? You follow the story to its final, quiet resting place, where the light still turns and the sea still holds its secrets. After the hidden notebook was archived, Hugh Ramsay's story faded again into the background. Officially, nothing unusual happened at Penwith Light in April of 1937. The logs resumed, the lamp continued its nightly sweep, and Hugh finished his post uneventfully before retiring in 1942. He moved inland after that, bought a modest cottage in Devon, grew vegetables, wrote letters to no one. When he passed away in 1958, his obituary was small. It listed his service years and the fact that he had diligently manned the Penwith Lighthouse for nearly 2 decades. No mention of the missing week, no hint of what he might have encountered. But in 1978, 20 years after Hugh's death, a storm struck the Cornish coast. It was brief but fierce, lightning, gale-force winds, waves taller than the bluff. In the aftermath, inspectors were sent to assess the lighthouse's structure. They found the building intact, but noticed something curious beneath a floorboard in the keeper's quarters. Another notebook. This one older, water-damaged, barely legible in places. It appeared to have been left by the lighthouse's previous keeper, a man named Elias Drew, who served from 1914 to 1919. And just like Hugh's hidden journal, it recorded a gap, a period in October 1917 when Elias stopped writing in the official ledger and instead began scribbling private notes. The patterns were eerily similar. Knocks at the door, unexplained outages, a flickering light seen from shore but not by the keeper himself, a warning not to write things down too clearly. The final entry in Elias's journal simply read, "They come to the ones who stay too long. The light sees them, but it doesn't stop them." That entry was dated exactly 20 years before Hugh's missing week. Was it coincidence? A shared delusion? Or something else? Something tied to that isolated stretch of sea and the beacon that had stood there longer than any man who kept it? No conclusive answer ever emerged. But to this day, mariners who pass Penwith Light during certain fog-heavy weeks in April report oddities. A flash that doesn't match the scheduled pattern, a second beam, faint, moving in the opposite direction, or the shape of a figure in the high lantern room, even though no one mans it now. And always the same question whispered in coastal pubs and fishing villages. What happened during that missing week? We may never know, but the notebook remains in the maritime archives, sealed, but not hidden. And the lighthouse still turns, casting its beam across the endless black sea, just as it always has. Watching, waiting, remembering. Every case leaves behind more questions than answers. If you're the kind who needs to know more, go ahead and subscribe. We dig deeper every time.